Late one evening, a white woman packed her bags and walked out on her disabled black veteran husband. She thought she was escaping a burden, but just days later, the truth would hit her harder than she ever imagined. What she discovered left her drowning in regret. And it's a story you won't forget. Stay with us until the end, because this journey will touch your heart. And before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. From the moment Claire Whitfield said I do to David Cole, she knew her choice would invite whispers. Charleston, South Carolina was a city steeped in tradition, and an interracial marriage like theirs was never easily accepted. Claire was white, raised in a family that cared deeply about appearances. David was black, a decorated U.S. Army veteran whose proud uniform could not shield him from the judgmental eyes of her mother, Elaine Whitfield, or the neighbors who never quite approved. But Claire didn't care. To her, David was everything she wanted in a partner, strong, loyal, and filled with a quiet dignity. That faith was tested after Afghanistan changed his life forever. David came home confined to a wheelchair, his body broken in the line of duty. Doctors spoke with finality when they told him he would never walk again. Claire chose to stand by him anyway. She cared for him through long days and exhausting nights, balancing work around the house with the constant needs of her husband. It was overwhelming, yes, but in her eyes, love was reason enough. Their life together was far from easy. Each morning brought new challenges, meals to prepare, appointments to juggle, chores to finish. By nightfall, Claire was drained, her back sore, her patience thin. But when she looked at David asleep in their bed, his face calm and untroubled, she found comfort. That moment of peace reminded her why she fought so hard to keep things steady. To her, it was proof that despite the hardship, their love was intact. Outside their home, however, reality was cruel. Friends who once visited rarely came by anymore. Neighbors offered polite smiles but avoided conversations. And Elaine's voice never stopped pressing down on Claire's resolve. "You've ruined your future with him," her mother would sneer. "Why chain yourself to a burden you'll never escape?" The words stung, but Claire tried to brush them off. She loved David. That was all that mattered. Or so she thought. It began subtly, the kind of changes you barely notice at first. David would leave the house late in the evening, sometimes returning hours later with no explanation. When Claire asked, he would dismiss her with vague answers, insisting it was nothing. At first, she told herself not to pry. He had given so much for his country, surely he deserved some privacy. But the pattern continued. His late-night outings became routine, and his evasive answers grew sharper. For the first time since they had married, Claire felt a crack forming in the trust that held them together. The thought disturbed her, but she forced it aside, until the night everything changed. David forgot his phone at home. Claire noticed it on the nightstand, the screen lighting up in the dim room. A new message had just come in. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone. But the glow of that screen pulled her eyes, and the words that appeared made her chest tighten in shock. "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing. Vanessa." Claire froze. Her heart thudded painfully as she read the name again. Vanessa. Who was she? The message was short, but it was enough to slice through every ounce of trust Claire had held onto. Her hands shook as she opened the phone. One message became several, and several became months of conversations. They weren't explicit, but they carried a tone far too warm, far too intimate for comfort. Each line she read felt like another betrayal. Claire's world tilted. For years she had endured prejudice, isolation, and even her own mother's scorn to love David without question. But now, staring at those words, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. Claire tried to shake the image of those texts from her mind, but the words followed her like shadows. Every time David left the house, she heard them echo. "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing." She wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. David had always been honest, always been kind. Yet doubt, once planted, grew like weeds. Her resolve weakened further when she caught the faint trace of perfume. Clinging to his clothes one night as she helped him into bed. It was subtle but unmistakably feminine, a scent she had never worn herself. The smell sent her thoughts racing. Who was this woman? Why had David kept her hidden? Claire confronted him that night, her voice trembling. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked. David's eyes widened, genuinely stunned. "Claire, no, never." His voice carried outrage and hurt, but it wasn't enough to calm her. He denied it again and again, yet his late-night absences continued. For Claire, every denial only deepened the sting. By now, her mother Elaine had noticed her fraying nerves. When Claire finally confessed her fears, Elaine seized the chance to drive the knife deeper. "I warned you," she said coldly. "This is who he is. Men like that can't be trusted." The words wrapped around Claire like chains, dragging her further into despair. She hated her mother's smugness, but she could no longer dismiss it. Days later, Claire's unease snapped into action. When David left the house in his wheelchair just after dusk, she grabbed her keys and followed at a distance. The city lights blurred through her windshield as she trailed him across Charleston. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She parked a block away when David stopped at a modest home on the edge of town. From her hiding place, Claire watched as he rang the bell. A woman appeared at the door. She greeted him with a warm smile, leaned down, and placed her hand on his shoulder. To Claire, the sight confirmed everything. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was betrayal, unfolding in front of her. By the time David disappeared inside, Claire was already driving away, her chest burning with rage. At home, she packed her belongings in a frenzy. Suitcases lined the hallway, drawers stood empty, and the sound of boxes slamming shut echoed through the house. Hours later, when David returned, the woman he thought he knew was gone. "I know what you've been doing," she spat as she stormed past him with her bags. "Don't act like I'm stupid. I've had enough." David tried to speak, confusion etched across his face, but Claire cut him off. "I'm done, David. I'm filing for divorce." She didn't look back. That night, she checked into a hotel, collapsed onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling in silence. For the first time in her marriage, she felt completely, utterly alone. The hotel room was quiet, but Claire's thoughts were deafening. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the image of David at that woman's door. His calls lit up her phone, one after another, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. To her, trust was broken, and silence felt safer than hearing another excuse. The next morning, Claire decided she needed air. She told herself she would spend the day wandering Charleston's shops, anything to distract her from the heaviness pressing against her chest. She left the hotel and walked aimlessly, her hands tucked in her coat pockets, her mind miles away. Then she froze. Across the street, through the window of a bustling cafe, she saw him. David was seated at a table near the glass, smiling in conversation with the very same woman from the house. They looked comfortable together, their faces lit with ease. Claire's stomach dropped. The sight alone was enough to shatter her, but what came next destroyed her completely. David pushed back his chair and stood up. For years, doctors had sworn it would never happen. For years, he had told her it was impossible. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she watched him rise to his full height, steady and strong. The man who had claimed to be bound to a wheelchair now stood freely, his body betraying the truth he had hidden all along. Her heart pounded, each beat heavy with betrayal. The questions ripped through her mind faster than she could form them. Had he been lying from the very beginning? Had all her years of caregiving been wasted? Was their marriage nothing more than a cruel performance? Her vision blurred with tears as she watched the woman lean close, her hand brushing against David's arm. He smiled at her warmly, then embraced her for a moment before the two of them walked out together, side by side. Claire staggered back, steadying herself against a lamppost as cars roared past, and pedestrians bustled by, unaware of the storm unraveling inside her. She wanted to scream, to call his name, to demand answers across the street, but her voice failed her. All she could do was watch until they disappeared into the crowd. By the time she returned to the hotel, her mind was a whirlwind of rage and despair. Every sacrifice she had made, every insult she had endured, every sleepless night spent caring for him. It all felt like a lie. She collapsed on the bed and stared at the divorce papers her lawyer had begun preparing. That night, with trembling hands, Claire signed her name at the bottom. For her, the marriage was over. David Cole had betrayed her, and nothing could undo the devastation. Claire carried the signed divorce papers to her mother's house the next day, her bag feeling heavier with every step. Elaine Whitfield welcomed her with the smug air of someone who believed she had been right all along. "You see," she said, her tone sharp. "I warned you. This is what happens when you tie yourself to a man like that." Claire wanted to fight back, but she no longer had the strength. She simply sat in silence, defeated, clinging to the thought that soon it would all be over. That evening, as she prepared to leave, Claire gripped the papers tightly, rehearsing what she would say when she finally handed them to David. But when she opened the front door, the words vanished. Standing on the porch was David Cole. He was not in his wheelchair. He was standing tall, his broad frame steady, a bouquet of flowers trembling in his hands. His eyes were wet with tears, and the sight of him nearly knocked the breath from Claire's lungs. All the anger she had bottled up came pouring out. "How long have you been lying to me?" she cried. "How long have you been sneaking around with her? I saw the texts. I smelled the perfume. I saw you walk, David. Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Her voice rose until it broke, her chest heaving with every word. David lowered his head, his voice unsteady. "Claire, please. It isn't what you think." Elaine stepped forward, arms crossed, her lips curled in disdain. "Don't listen to him," she muttered, but Claire raised a hand, silencing her mother without taking her eyes off her husband. This was their moment, and no one else's. David's voice shook as he began to speak, but his words carried a weight that filled the doorway. "The woman you think is Vanessa isn't who you believe she is. Her name is Dr. Naomi Brooks. She's a physical therapist. For the last year, she's been helping me do the impossible, teaching me to walk again." He paused, his breath trembling. "I didn't tell you, because I couldn't bear to see hope in your eyes only to fail you. I wanted to surprise you when the day finally came." Claire stood frozen, her heart caught between fury and disbelief. The papers slipped from her grasp and fell silently to the floor. David stepped closer, pointing at his own legs as tears spilled down his face. "That day in the cafe, I wasn't betraying you. I was celebrating progress. For the first time in years, Claire, I stood on my own 2 feet." For a long moment, Claire said nothing. The weight of David's words hung in the air, heavy and disorienting. She wanted to believe him, but the image of him laughing with that woman, of perfume clinging to his clothes, and of his phone lighting up with messages from Vanessa was still carved deep into her memory. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. David nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know how it looks. I know what you saw, and I know it must have broken you. But Claire, I swear on my life, I was never unfaithful. The texts you read weren't romantic. Naomi was encouraging me after our therapy sessions. When she wrote, 'Last time was amazing,' she meant the progress we made. Every step I took with her was one step closer to this moment. I saved her number under her sister's name, Vanessa, because it was the number Naomi used when she started out. I never thought it mattered, but I see now how wrong I was." Claire's mind reeled. The explanation made sense, but her heart still resisted. She had lived with the ache of suspicion for so long, had carried the burden of whispers. From her mother and society, that letting go of her anger felt almost impossible. "You should have told me," she finally said, her voice sharp. "Do you know how humiliating it was to believe you were cheating on me? Do you know what it's like to defend you every day, only to think I was defending a lie?" David stepped closer, the bouquet trembling in his hands. His tears fell freely now, but his voice was steady. "I do know humiliation, Claire. I've lived with it every day since I came back from the war. Not just because of this chair, but because of who I am. I fought for this country, but when I returned, I was a black man in a wheelchair. People didn't see a hero. They saw a burden. They pitied me, ignored me, doubted me. Even the benefits I was promised as a veteran were delayed, tangled in endless red tape. while others received theirs quickly. Do you know what that does to a man's pride? Claire's throat tightened. She had never heard him speak this way before, never with such raw honesty. David's voice deepened as he continued. Every time I saw the way people looked at us, at you, I hated myself a little more. I hated that you had to hear whispers, that you had to carry the weight of their judgment. So I kept therapy a secret, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to give you something no one else could take away. I wanted to stand beside you, Claire, not sit below you as your patient. I wanted to walk again, not just for me, but for us. Tears blurred Claire's vision as she stared at him. The anger that had driven her for weeks began to crumble, replaced by something else, grief, compassion, and a deep aching love. She had doubted him. She had let her mother's voice seep into her mind and convince her of the worst. Now, hearing his truth, she felt her chest crack open with regret. The divorce papers lay at her feet, forgotten. Claire took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. David, why didn't you just tell me? Because, David said softly, I couldn't bear the thought of seeing hope in your eyes and then failing you. I needed to prove it to myself first. And when I finally could, I wanted the first person I stood in front of to be you. The words pierced through her defenses. Claire pressed her hands to her face, her body shaking with silent sobs. David set the flowers down gently, then reached for her trembling hands. For the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away. Claire's hands shook as David held them, her tears slipping freely down her cheeks. For weeks, she had lived in torment, believing her marriage had collapsed under lies and betrayal. Now, standing before her was the man she had nearly left behind, revealing, not treachery, but a secret struggle to reclaim his dignity. The papers on the floor seemed meaningless, scraps of anger compared to the truth unfolding between them. David looked at her with a steadiness she hadn't seen since before the war. His eyes, though wet with grief, held a fire of determination. Slowly he sank to one knee, not because of weakness, but as an act of strength. Claire gasped as she realized what he was doing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it to reveal a shining ring. Claire, he said, his voice breaking but unwavering, will you marry me again? Not as my caretaker, not as the woman who carried my burdens, but as my equal. I don't want pity or duty between us anymore. I want love, only love. I want us to start over, together, without secrets, without doubts. Just you and me. The moment stole Claire's breath. She had dreamt of this man, of this strength, when he returned broken from war. She had waited years, caring for him in silence, defending him against whispers, only to nearly let those whispers destroy her faith. Now here he was, kneeling before her on both feet, offering not an apology alone but a promise of a new life. Behind her, Elaine stood frozen, for once with no words to cut or poison. Her daughter's world, which she had tried to tear down with scorn, was being rebuilt in front of her eyes by the very man she had called a burden. Claire turned her head slightly, meeting her mother's gaze, and for the first time she felt no shame in her choice. She looked back at David, her tears falling faster. Yes, she whispered. Then louder with conviction, yes, I'll marry you again. David rose, slipping the ring onto her finger as if renewing a bond that had never truly been broken. Claire fell into his arms, and for a long moment they held each other, their sobs mixing with relief. In that embrace, the fear and anger dissolved. What remained was love, scarred, tested, but stronger than ever before. 2 months later, Charleston saw a different kind of wedding. It wasn't lavish or grand, but for Claire and David Cole, it was everything they needed. The ceremony was held in a small garden, surrounded only by close friends, a handful of family members, and the people who had stood by them through the storm. Unlike their first wedding, there were no hushed whispers, no questions about appearances or burdens. This time, the vows they prepared spoke only of love, equality, and a future built together. Among the guests was Dr. Naomi Brooks, the woman once mistaken for a mistress. Claire had reached out to her soon after the confrontation, embarrassed but determined to thank her. What began as an awkward meeting blossomed into understanding and even friendship. Naomi wasn't just David's therapist. She was the one who had given him the chance to stand tall again. Claire honored her openly at the ceremony, saying, "Because of you, my husband walks beside me today, and for that, I will be forever grateful." Naomi's eyes glistened as she embraced her. Elaine Whitfield sat stiffly in the second row, her pride silenced by the undeniable sight of her daughter's joy. She had opposed this marriage from the beginning, had fed suspicion and doubt into Claire's mind, but even she could not deny the truth now. David, once scorned as a burden, stood proudly at the altar, the strength in his legs matched only by the love in his eyes. Elaine had nothing left to say. When the time came for vows, Claire's voice did not waver. "I promise to walk beside you, not behind you and not ahead of you. We are equals and I will love you without fear or doubt." David's vows were simple but profound. "I promise to never keep secrets again, to honor you not as my caretaker but as my partner, and to face this world hand in hand, no matter who dares to whisper against us." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the garden erupted in applause. It wasn't the kind of applause given to a perfect couple. It was the kind reserved for people who had fought through fire and come out stronger. Afterward, as the guests lingered, David and Claire slipped away quietly. They walked together down a cobblestone street, fingers entwined, the sun dipping low over Charleston. Every step David took was a reminder of what they had endured. The prejudice, the doubts, the suspicion, the nearly broken marriage. Yet here they were, walking side by side, not as caretaker and patient, not as proof against society's judgment, but simply as two people in love. The road ahead would not be perfect. David still felt pain in his legs when the weather turned cold, and Claire still carried scars from the weeks of mistrust. But perfection was never their goal. What mattered was that they had reclaimed their love, stripped of fear and shame, built again on trust and equality. For the first time in years, the future felt bright. As the city lights flickered on and the evening breeze carried their laughter, Claire and David Cole walked into a new chapter, one where no whisper, no doubt, and no burden could ever tear them apart again. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight with the world, but the ones we fight with ourselves, between doubt and trust, fear and love. Claire nearly let suspicion tear her marriage apart, and David almost lost the woman he fought so hard to stand beside. Yet forgiveness gave them a second chance, proving that love can rise even when everything seems broken. It makes you wonder, when trust is shaken, what keeps love alive? Have you ever held on to someone when it would have been easier to let go? Share your thoughts or even a piece of your own story in the comments. You never know whose heart your story might heal. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us how powerful love, hope, and resilience can be.